week out from the injury, and I just knew I had to go buy paints, and it didn't make any sense, but I didn't really have a lot of impulse control at that point either, as a byproduct of the brain injury. And so I was like, I'm gonna go buy all of these paints.
Welcome back to Fearless Narrative, a show that's all about the incredible stories of women who are changing the game, breaking the rules, and pushing through the boundaries to face their fears head on, because they are fearless entrepreneurs and creatives, and we love to see it. I am your host, Courtlyn Jones, and on our show, we go into a deep dive into captivating storytelling and engaging conversations with these incredible women as they share how they are pursuing their passions and shattering glass ceilings along the way. We love that so much. It's so inspiring and so empowering to share these stories with you. And hopefully it will empower you to embrace your own fearless path. Our show is all about feeling the fear and doing it anyway, as well as women supporting women. We love that. We need more of that always. So before we get started, don't forget to hit the button to subscribe to our show. We also would love a nice 5-star review at the end. Without further ado, let's go into a new episode right now. Enjoy the show. Hello, and welcome back to Fearless Narratives. I am your host, Courtlyn Jones. And joining us today, we have a true visionary and artist who's making an indelible mark in the world. Joining us today is Kristina Libby, an installation and fine art artist residing in the vibrant heart of New York City. Kristina's journey is a testament to the power of art. A traumatic brain injury set her on a path of self-discovery, one that ultimately led her to embrace her own talents as an artist and the potential for change that creativity holds. Her work has been recognized in prestigious publications and even influenced legislative change. It also reflects her unwavering belief in the power of art to make the world a better place. Kristina, how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm good. I'm happy to talk to you as always.
Same.
Okay, so your journey from a traumatic brain injury to becoming an installation and fine art artist is incredible. Can you share the moments that led you to embrace art as a way of life and how you got to where you are today?
In 2019, I was kite surfing in Rockaway Beach, and or like right near Rockaway Beach, and I ended up listening to sort of bad instructions from my kite surfing instructor, and I was being blown towards the highway, and it's like an 8-lane highway there, and so normally you should go over the water, and instead I went over the sand, and I realized I was getting closer and closer to this highway. And so I had sort of this terrible decision to make, which was, did I think I could clear the highway and land on the other side, or did I have to release the kite and just see what would happen if I fell? And so I didn't know if I could make it over the highway. And so I let go of my kite. There's like a little hook right by your waist, a little red clip, and I let go, and I ended up falling about 20 feet onto my head. And it was something that at the time, I obviously fell. I blacked out. A few moments later, I woke up, and I didn't understand how bad the injury was, right? Like I didn't know because I wasn't bleeding, and I just had like scratch marks on my body from being dragged by the kite after I had fallen. And so at first I felt like, oh, I just have a headache. I'm going to be okay. And a couple of days later, I woke up on the bathroom floor of my apartment. Well, I woke up like in the middle of the night, kind of like sobbing. And I just like had to go and lay on the bathroom floor because it was just like cold and it was dark and there was no noise. So that was basically the condition that I started in. And I was like really confused, right? Because my brain, you have that kind of injury, your brain is really confused because it is swelling. It doesn't know what to do. It doesn't know how to process anything. And I had this weird urge to paint, and I wasn't a painter ever before this. I like wasn't someone who necessarily even like knew how to paint or allowed myself space to paint. And I was just like, I have to get paints. And at that point, when I started to really feel that like overwhelming desire to paint, was about a week out from the injury. And I just knew I had to go buy paints, and it didn't make any sense, but I didn't really have a lot of impulse control at that point either, as a byproduct of the brain injury. And so I was like, I'm just gonna go. I'm gonna go buy all of these paints. And I ended up, my mom was with me and we went to a Michael's and I just bought like $1,000 worth of paint, which was, oh, it was crazy. It was so much money. I didn't know what to do with it. And then I like got to where we were going and I like set up the easel and the paints and everything. Or my dad made me an easel. I set up the big canvas and the paints. But I didn't have any like medium. I didn't have any sort of like thinner for the paint or anything. I really didn't know what I was doing. But as soon as I started to paint, all of the symptoms I had from my brain injury, which was like crushing headaches, like an inability to sort of handle sound or to handle light, all of those things started to disappear. And in this moment, I felt this like massive sense of relief that was my brain just being like so thankful for something that was like a healing solution. And so um, that was probably the first big step to sort of this point in my life where I'm starting to feel like, no, I want to be a creative person. Like I want to live a creative practice. But I would say I ignored it probably for most of my life. And sort of an interesting little anecdote on that is once I started painting, my best friend said to me, oh, well, you wanted to paint in this springtime. Like she's like, you told me you were thinking about taking painting classes. And I don't really remember that, but I know that I just like didn't give myself permission to do that because I was doing fancy corporate job things. And so it wasn't until my brain was like, you have that I started.
That's incredible. I'm actually really happy that you're sharing this today, but also I've had an artist recently on the show in the first season who also had a story that was about a traumatic brain injury. And then she also had the urge to paint and had no idea about like anything about painting. But then like, again, she just had this feeling to paint and now she's just painting all the time. And I'm really curious to know like what that connection actually is and like what makes, like what's the trigger behind these brain injuries that are causing so much, I guess, creative thinking to come out of, I guess, both of you. It's really like, I don't know, incredible. It's incredible.
So I have actually done a ton of research on that. So there's two things to answer that question. One is this is a relatively normal outcome of people who have had a brain injury that they feel drawn towards a creative practice. And I think part of it comes from the fact that when you have a brain injury, your brain has to completely rewire itself, right? Like not depending on the severity completely or for depending on sort of the gradients of what it is, it's having to make new neural connections. And so your brain is really, really spongy post injury. And this is the thing I try and tell people all the time about brain injuries, which is often a doctor is like, you should just relax, like take it easy, like don't push yourself too hard. But I ended up having a really wonderful conversation with a neuroscientist at NYU, and I'm going to forget his name, but he was talking about your brain is so squishy that if you try and learn something after you're having a traumatic brain injury, what you're really doing is you're helping your brain do what it wants to do. It wants to learn something, right? It wants to be making new connections and having different ideas. And I think for me, part of what painting was is that my brain, I think I had a lot of visual problems. And I think learning a visual practice was all about like stepping into a new world and sort of exploring, like allowing my brain to have a way to express itself that didn't necessarily have anything to do with the way my brain had always expressed itself. Like I was really like a words person. I was a writer, like, but that was hard for me after my brain injury. I had a hard time remembering the names of animate objects. So like anything that was alive, like a person or like the word for a camel or a zebra or those kinds of words. And so visual language gave me a way to relax, to feel connected, to feel like I was expressing myself without relying on sort of the mediums that I had before. And I think that's common because it is so frustrating when your brain isn't working that visually communicating, it just like feels like a relief.
Mm. I see that. I love that too. So you're also the creator of the Chunkos Project, which
Mhm.
offers companionship and comfort to the children in hospitals. And that's truly heartwarming. So I really want to ask you, how did you come up with the idea for Chunkos, and what kind of impact have these friends made in the lives of young patients?
Yes, so I created the Chunkos honestly largely because there were two things. One, for me, the recovery process was really lonely. So I was in New York City. Um, was choosing to spend a lot of time alone because it was so overwhelming to talk to other people. I really struggled with interactions. I had a hard time with people's energy. Like if people were really high energy, I found it really, really tiring. And so I was in and out of the hospitals almost 4 days a week for from August until January,
Wow.
February. Um, and it would have been longer, but then we had the pandemic and then I just stopped going to the hospital.
Mm.
Um, but when I was there, I would often see little kids who were more severely injured than me, who were had a companion caretaker, right? They'd have like a mom or a nanny or a sibling with them, but they all just looked really bored and alone. And so I wanted to be able to create a way for the hospital to start to feel like a fun place to go that was like gamified and exciting and that you could feel like you had a best friend who was just like geolocated to a hospital and waiting there for you, right? And so that's really what the Chunkos idea is this idea of kind of best friends in hospitals um, who want to help you on your journey. And this idea of submerge, making it more fun, making it more interactive, a character that you can kind of always talk to as much as you want to, but who's also learning about you and your needs and your problems. So it's still very much an in progress project. So we're still really early. There's not a lot of insights to share yet, but it's underway. It's just a very hard, long project. So I'm trying to figure it out.
I love that. I'm really excited. I'm really excited to see it all come to fruition when it's all ready, because that's incredible,
Thank you.
Kristina.
Thank you.
Can you tell us about the role of art and creativity in your process to recovery? And how did art play a part in your healing and personal growth?
Yeah, this is a thing I'm still working on. So originally, after my brain injury, painting was profoundly relaxing. I think I said that it was a relief for my brain, right? And that's really the way I would think about it. I would paint for sort of 6 to 8 hours a day because it would just like let my brain calm down from this sort of hyper frantic moment that it was part of, or this experience of because your brain is uncomfortable. Like your brain knows it's not working right,
Yeah.
you know? And so it almost feels like it's in this like extremely agitated state. And so for first for me for painting was, oh, this can just like calm my brain down, right? And so I would wake up in the morning, I would paint, I would do a little bit of work, I would paint some more. And I would kind of do like almost an hour of painting for every 15 minutes of work I tried to do for quite a while. And that was really, really transformative in sort of creating like a deeper level of connection with myself.
Mm.
And then as we sort of fast forward into the pandemic in spring of 2020, I started another project called the Floral Heart Project, which was when I started to do outdoor installation based art. And that for me was really transformative about taking my like indoor pain and like, you know, you're painting, you're so alone, you're doing it in a studio. People only see it if you want to show it to them. And kind of like bringing that outdoor pain outside, right? And starting to connect with other people. And I love street art. Like, I think it's incredibly transformative. I think it's really good for society. I think this idea of like expressing how we feel in the public domain and other people kind of been a way being like forced to interact with those feelings, it helps you feel seen, right? Like as an artist, I felt seen, but I also think I was saying, like, these are my feelings. Does anyone else feel them? Like, who
Mhm.
else is in community with me? And that started to create this network of people who also like were brokenhearted and they were upset, but they didn't want to solve that feeling with anger, right? They wanted to create sort of a more beautiful place, a more loving place. And I started to really feel like I belonged, right? Like a real sense of acceptance that even though my brain was injured and it wasn't working the way I wanted it to, that what it was doing was still good, right? Like that I could still have an impactful role to play in the world. And I think, moving into creating the Chunkos was sort of about, okay, how do I create some of what I've learned from street art and start to put that in places where there's even more impact, right? And being able to sort of take these skills I have, um, and these other things I love, like storytelling and art and community, and putting them all into a space, um, and really being like, well, how can I be a leader in that way? And then through the process of working on the Chunkos, which was so interesting, is I started to do a lot more writing, and then I have been doing so much more writing, and I have written a novel, um, and then that sort of next iteration, novel writing is like a deep investigation about emotions and feelings and who you are as a person and how other people work and what that means. And that has been so transformative in helping me understand myself, but also helping me understand how that brain injury happened in the first place.
Mm.
Because there was so much emotion involved in what I was feeling that day before I got onto the kite that I didn't understand, that was so distracting, right? And so I made an error because I was emotionally distracted. And so that whole path of each one of these sort of creative explorations growing and growing and growing on top of itself, I think has really helped me create a deeper understanding of who I am, but also like a much better understanding of other people in the world and what they're going through and their feelings. And I think ultimately how art is just a way that we are like trying to like show our feelings to each
Mhm.
other and be like, do you see me? Do you have these feelings? What do you think about them? Can we talk about them? And I don't think I would have felt comfortable saying any of those things before my injury.
Mhm. You're so beautiful, Kristina, inside and out. I love you so much. That was
Oh,
like
thank you. It's mutual.
that was a really good answer to the question. And I will say that personally, as an artist myself, I have learned that because I also have a my own, I guess, health issue that triggered me into my new path, but also like I find myself in a place where I'm constantly feeling stuck when it comes to expressing myself as well. And I find that using writing now has also been more of a tool for me. I've always done painting and drawing and even sculpting in the past, but writing as well has been a new thing that I'm really getting into. And I think
Amazing.
it's helping me to, I guess, say the words that I can't feel. I feel like I can't say them out loud because I stutter and I get panicky. But putting it down on paper, it really is a healing process to have it all just finally out of my body, out of my brain, and just have it all on paper somewhere.
Yes. Have you ever done the artist way?
No, what is that?
Oh my gosh. Okay. You have to try it. So, James Cameron's first wife, and I'm going to forget what her actual, Julia Cameron, I think, wrote this book called The Artist's Way. And it is a workbook of sorts that you do over, I think, 12 weeks. And it has these little exercises that you do every day. But I probably did this like 15 years ago, and I've done it maybe two or three times. And it's all about finding ways to kind of like express and understand the feelings inside of you so as to improve your artistic practice. And I think it's like extremely helpful. You might love it. And this point is you're like experimenting with more writing.
Yeah,
It's a really, really good, a great tool.
I love that. Thank you for sharing that.
Yes.
So you are described as a visionary and a fine art artist. What concepts and ideas drive your work, and what messages do you hope to convey through your installations and fine art pieces?
Um, no, it's being called a visionary is like a really intense title. Um, For me, social issues, well, two things. I think when I started making art, it was obviously driven by like a desire to heal, like to heal myself. Um, and then it has sort of grown to this desire to heal community. And I think that's still like really a large part of it. I think I'll always be an artist with like a social practice because that's kind of the experience I come out of. I have a master's degree in international security and undergrad in international development studies and religion. Like I've always been really interested in like conflict and social problems. Um, and and I want us to talk about them in a different way. And I think art, particularly street art, is like a really accessible way of doing that. In part, one of the struggles I have with art, with even with fine art particularly, is that it feels like it's not for everyone, right? Like so much of that art feels like it's for people who feel comfortable going into museums or feel comfortable going into galleries. And like I grew up in a tiny little small town and I I didn't feel comfortable in those spaces for a really long time, right? And so I think I am maybe less informed by traditional thinkers or artists than I am this like deep desire to have like a conversation with people. Like that's why street art is interesting. That's why kind of all of this work is interesting to me is like I want to have a conversation. And the more and more I've gotten into fiction writing, and the more I started to think about novel as story, but particularly like novel as a way of a reader understanding an emotional journey, like, and of us being able to share our emotional sort of wounds and experiences with each other, the more I've also started to think about like an artistic practice that way of like, this is what is wrong, is we feel afraid socially saying like, I am hurt or I am scared or like, you are not hearing me and I have things I need to tell you, right? Like society doesn't really accept those conversations. We have a lot of like posturing and you're wrong and you did this and like anger is acceptable, but like fear isn't and sadness isn't. And like I think I'm really driven by that and like those conversations of like, how do we have more like emotional understanding and engagement um about things that are really hard. Like the chunkos is for little kids who are in long-term like pediatric situations. A lot of those children aren't going to live. That doesn't mean we shouldn't create the best possible experience like for them ever. And like also in part because they might not live. We should make the best experience for them because they are human and they deserve it, right? And I think that that's really, really important to me. And I try and think about that a lot. Um, and even when I'm painting, I'm really trying to make like sort of safe. I want to like paint places that make you feel safe. So, yeah.
I love how art is more than just visuals. You know, it really is about evoking emotions and it's about community. Well, some art is for community, some is just for expression. You know, it really depends. But I feel like I love how your art is, I think, all of those things. I feel like you have this desire to help and to heal so many around the world. I think that is so beautiful, Kristina.
Yes.
I recently actually found out that you wrote a book, I guess in 2016 it came out, and I bought it.
Oh my gosh. I didn't even know you could buy that. Oh,
It
that's
was
too
the last
funny.
copy on Amazon, and I read the whole thing, and I finished it yesterday. And I took so many notes because I've been trying to grow my Instagram account and stuff for so long. So Kristina's book is about how you don't need
so
social
funny.
media unless you are doing it right. That is the title of her book. You don't need social media unless you are doing it right. And it is a small guide for those who are trying to build their brand and build their brand presence. And I'm currently in that state where I'm trying to build my community. So when I was doing my deep dive into who you are, Kristina, I found this book and I was like, I have to, it's all aligned. I have to ask you about it. So you also have a background as a professor for social media. I want to know more about that background of yours and how it came to be into a book now. Like, how did it all start for you?
So funny. I didn't even know you could find that. Like, I didn't even know there was still a listing of that online. Wow. Okay, that's hilarious. So I used to teach at NYU and the University of Florida, and I like started doing social media in 2005, when no one did it, and I was really poor, and I was like working, and I didn't have enough money, and I wanted to get this job at an ad agency, and they were like, "We can't hire you, but we could hire you freelance to do social media." And I was like, "Yeah, totally great. I know a ton about social media," and I didn't know anything. And they started working with like National Geographic and Philips and all of these brands right at the beginning of social media. And then I spoke at a conference about social media, and a woman approached me and she was like, "Oh, would you like to teach a course about social media for the master's program at the University of Florida?" And I was like, "Sure, okay." And that's how I started teaching social media. And then at NYU, I started teaching social media and marketing in general. I used to love social media like it back in the day, because I thought I could do, I guess, all the things that I still want to do now, right? Which is you can have conversations, you can have um, really interesting, sort of playful ways to engage with people and make change and make impact. And I think that was a lot of what social media did before it became kind of like the dark cesspool that it can be now.
Yes.
And that can be really hard. But yeah, that is so funny. I like can't believe that still exists. That feels like a whole different person. That was such a different point in my life. One thing on that though, especially, because this is a podcast about art and creating, I'm really glad that I didn't have this same dream when I was like 18 years old.
Mm.
Only because I have learned so much by doing so many jobs before coming to like a creative moment and a creative like practice in my life, right? And like I think that's really helped me do like the Floral Heart Project. I was only able to grow because I knew so much about business and partnerships and marketing and all of that to do it, right? And so it feels like a million lifetimes ago, but at the same time, I'm really grateful I did all of those things before. So I hope it's useful. I don't even know what's in it anymore, but
I took so many notes. It's really good. Like I would
good.
say go buy it, but I'm pretty sure I bought the last one, so don't go buy it. But it's really great.
That's so funny.
I'm
Okay.
really excited to have it all into practice when I start to build my brand presence, because my brand presence is currently really poor and I need to get it up and make it
Well, amazing. Let me know how I can help any way I
can. I will tell you how I use your practices. Yes. Okay. Can you share insights on how creative expression can serve as a source of strength and healing for individuals facing adversity?
I cannot say like powerfully enough how much learning a new practice can be so transformative when you feel sick or you feel like you are like going through a hard part in your life, right? That it doesn't, I think when we are struggling, we often think like, oh, I'm just going to do less, or I need to rest, or I just need a break, or I just want to step away from my life. And instead, I think if we can step towards something, then that can help us sort of reframe our entire adversarial experience with living. Like for me, learning to paint was a really powerful way of thinking like, this is really tough. What I'm going through is so hard. I know I'm going to be terrible at painting. And that's fine because it is just a mechanism I am using to heal. But then in time, I got better at painting and I got better and better and better. And then I started to think like, whoa, my brain doesn't heal. Maybe it's okay. Like maybe I can do this with painting and maybe my life can go this way. And that's really okay. And I think I have a play coming out in November in a few weeks. It was just a big new thing for me, an entirely new experience. And part of the reason I did that is because in January, I was feeling like pretty burnt. I like was like, I'm not exactly sure what I'm doing with my life, and I don't know what I want the next decade to look like, and I don't know how to think about it. And a man said to me, a CEO that I work with, he said, well, what fills your cup up? And I was like, uh, I don't know because I no longer had the Floral Heart Project. I wasn't deep in the Chunkos. I didn't really know. And then I had been working on television scripts with my writing partner, and we were like, well, let's do a table read, which is when you get together a group of actors and you can bring a little audience together and they read your pilot script. And so we decided to do that. And about 3 weeks after I had the conversation about what fills your cup up, I had this table read. And there was this moment, it was so fast. It was like in the first 45 seconds where there was a joke and the actor just delivered it perfectly, exactly the way I had always heard it in my head. And the audience just started laughing so hard. And like between this space where there had been nothing, there was just, there's a real kind of like edgy quietness before a performance starts because everyone's like, am I going to hate this? I don't know what it is. And then for that to change and just be like so happy and filled with joy. And my cup was just like, I got filled it really filled me all the way up. And then I was like, well, maybe I'll experiment with this a little bit more, right? I put on another table read, but I was like, well, if I make television, this knows just often not a live studio audience, like that is that going to have the same filling effect? Well, what if I try and write a play? And I have no idea if that will feel good or if it will just feel terrifying or what will happen. But I think that's a great example of something very recently where I felt like life feels so hard and I don't know what I'm doing and I don't know what direction to go in. And I think a lot of people in that moment would have been just like, I'm gonna rest or I'm gonna go on vacation or like, I don't know, be sad, right? Like whatever it is that you would do in that moment. And yet for me, by experimenting with more things, I have been able to grow so much like further out of that moment. Um, there's interestingly, and this is totally a tangent, so tell me to stop, but there's this research about our brains. And I kind of fell into it from learning about the science of intuition and sort of like what is intuition and how does it work and why do we believe in it? And I talked to this professor from UCLA. His last name is Romero, and I just forgot his first name. That is a problem I still have from the brain injury. But so he was talking about micro dosing, which I don't do because I had a brain injury and I just don't put anything in my brain because I get really worried about that. But he was talking about the way that microdosing works as part of a therapeutic practice. And what microdosing does is it connects basically two disjointed neural pathways. So you form a new idea, and that new idea helps you to think about the world in a different way. And a lot of people are finding that more successful than traditional talk therapy. A lot of the times in traditional talk therapy, what you're trying to do is tell yourself a story, right? You're trying to re-narrate an experience so you can feel better about it. Mm-hmm. But often, if we're too anxious or too depressed, talk therapy doesn't work because in order to re-narrate our thoughts about ourselves, we have to have new experiences. Mm-hmm. But if we're nervous or anxious or we have depression, we don't want to go find new experiences, right? We want to do the things that feel comfortable. So then it's really hard to rewrite the stories, right? Which is why more and more people are microdosing, because it kind of, for some people, is a path out of that. But experimentation does the same thing, right? So if you're going through something hard and you're feeling depressed or you're feeling anxious, you can microdose, up to you. You can go to talk therapy, which I deeply believe in. But sometimes you could just try something new, right? And trying a new artistic practice, I think, like sculpting or drawing, or I don't know, I've become really obsessed with Mid-Journey lately, right? It can help you develop a new set of skills that really helps you change how you think about yourself, how you think about past experiences, like you were talking about with writing, right? And then it helps you to move on to something else. So, yeah, I think when you're going through tough times, trying something new, knowing you're going to be terrible at it, but just keep trying. I think for me personally, and I imagine for other people, can have an extremely transformative impact on your life.
I love that. And I will say that our theme for the podcast is always feeling the fear and doing it anyway. And I think that your point here was totally aligned with my whole theme. And I think it's also really important for those who also don't believe in therapy or don't feel comfortable going to therapy. Art can be an amazing way to have that same effect, or even a better effect for some. And I agree that trying new things, because I've also heard this study before, or like this theory that life moves slower whenever we are not trying new things. So,
Yes.
or it moves faster. So like if we try new things, life slows down because we're like in this like kid-like state where we're like, learning a new thing, and it's more exciting because we are out of our comfort zone, or, just like experimenting with new things. And like life goes by too fast whenever we're like in this boring stagnancy, because we're always like, doing things every day, the same exact thing, and it's boring. So like we all feel we're kind of aging faster because we're doing the same boring thing.
Yes. No, I don't know. I think sometimes when I'm learning new things, I feel like time does move faster, but my entire life feels so much more full, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, I completely agree with all of that. And I also just think like, I don't know, I don't want to look back at my life and be like, well, that decade, I just like worked in an office and I had drinks on Thursday and Friday nights with my friends and I watched like every season of Grey's Anatomy or whatever. Like I don't want to look back at my life like that. And I think the challenge we have as humans is how can you live your specific life, right? The most fulfilled, like interesting, like I want to say happy, but like joyful
Yeah.
existence of your being. Like happy, so transitory, right? But I have found when I am creating, I feel right. Like
Mm-hmm.
I feel like this is the thing I am supposed to be doing. And I have this little theory that you meet people in the world and people who are like filling their creative purpose, those people glow.
Mm-hmm.
And like they are just like, is a different wavelength of living than other people. And that it takes a long time to find out what like what creative practice or how you form it that gives you that sense of glow.
Yeah.
But it's an iterative practice, but you
Mm-hmm.
have to keep doing it and it changes. I don't know. I want to be a really successful painter in like my 80s. Like that's when you become a successful painter, is like they're the end chapters of your life, but you have to start painting now to get
Yeah.
to the point where 50 years from now, someone can be like, she's been painting for 50 years. Isn't she accomplished? Takes a long time.
It does, but it's worth it. I think in the end, I would hope.
Yes.
Okay, so bonus question. When was the last time that you felt fearless? A time when you were afraid, but you did it anyway?
I feel afraid a lot. And I will tell you a story. I was in Greece in August, and so basically 4 years ago when I stopped kite surfing, I gave it up. And that was really, really hard for me because kite surfing, it felt like a creative expression, but it also felt like I felt at home
Mm-hmm.
there. Like I felt this deep connection to the earth because you are both skimming above the waves and you are, it sounds quite corny, but it feels like you are like dancing with the wind. That's how it felt to me, this
Love
really natural expression of who I was. And it was this community of people that I just like loved because they were like risk takers and they were ocean lovers and they were like, I don't know, every kite surfing club around the world is like dance parties and everyone is like really kind of wild in a way that I really loved. And then this happened to my brain.
it.
And I learned how special my brain is to me and how much I want it to function. And so I was like, I'm never gonna do that again. And
Mm-hmm.
yet I had this like really deep longing for this sport that I had given up. And I tried surfing after a couple of years and my brain was better and it just wasn't the same. It was boring and I love people who surf, but it just like it didn't fill the same desire. Um and I was like, okay, I'm just gonna give this up for the rest of my life. And then I was in Greece and I saw people windsurfing. And I thought, well, maybe I could try that. And I was so afraid when I got there that I like started crying and I like told the man, I was like, I have this terrible kite surfing injury and I don't know if I can do this. And he was like, well, let's just try and we'll just see. And he, sort of talked me through the little steps and we practice on dry land and then we go out on the water and I was able to stand up and immediately sort of move with the windsurfing board. And I just started to cry because it was the exact same feeling. It was just safer. And for me, that was such a realization that you can have the things you want. They might just be a little bit different, or they might be a little bit later, or it might um, be something that's a tiny bit slower to get to, but like you can have it. And that that realization has been really transformative, I think, in the past few months of I think when I had my brain injury, I had started to believe that like I couldn't have the things I wanted, that
Mm-hmm.
I wouldn't have the success or the career or sort of the people in my life or the sports that I loved. Um and doing that with the windsurfing helped me realize that like yes, you can find the things you love again and again. And it might be different than it was before, but it can still feel the same. Like it can still do the same thing inside of you. And that was really, really powerful for me. So I was really glad that I had been so afraid and been like, I don't want to be afraid and try and conquer that. And I am really trying to like live that belief in my life, like trying to find things that make me afraid and then be like, okay, how can I pick this apart so it doesn't scare me? Or how can I just know that it scares me and go right in and do it anyway? I have a wonderful friend, Mona Patel, and she has a phrase which is she's basically like, I want to do hard things.
Mm-hmm.
Because doing hard things is so transformative. And I think um I feel the same thing with things that sort of make you afraid. Like if it makes you afraid, it's important to get past the fear.
I agree. And I'm so proud of you for doing that and for sharing that because
Thank
that
you.
was beautiful.
Thank
I feel like I always want to cry when I talk to you.
Oh no, that's
But
the worst.
it's not a bad thing. It's a good thing. It's always like I just love how you express yourself and how you talk about your life and who you are and your passions. It's truly emotional and it's beautiful and it's healing for me to even hear your healing process. So it's a good cry.
Okay, okay.
Okay,
I'll
we're
take
almost
that.
done
A
here.
good cry. Okay.
So our last two questions. So for emerging artists and those seeking to embrace their creative processes, is there any advice from you to offer them to those who are trying to get started as entrepreneurs or as artists or just anyone trying to pursue a creative passion that they're possibly afraid of doing?
A repetition. I think that's the only secret to a creative practice or to entrepreneurship is you just do something over and over again. And I guess the other part of that is like repetition plus amplification. Like share what you're doing with people every time you do it. Like when I started the Floral Heart Project, I was like, put some flowers out in the street. I'm gonna see what happened. But I like posted them on Instagram and my friends were like, oh, this really connects with me. And I was like, oh, I'll do it another time because it's helping you too. And then I remember after like 3 weeks of doing these, I had a friend send me someone else's Instagram photo of the hearts, right? And then I did them every single week for like, I don't know, I think 10 weeks. And then I partnered with 1-800-Flowers because I couldn't afford to do it on my own anymore. And then maybe every other week for about a year. And I think that's true of everything, just like repetition, because no one knows who you are until you show them who you are. And so you have to do it and then you have to tell them about it.
That was a great way to end the show. I love that. Thank you. And lastly, how can our audience find you?
Oh, you can find me on the social media channels. So on Instagram, it's at Kristina M. Libby. Twitter anymore. Or I also have an art account called Light. I think it's a V. And yeah, on LinkedIn, or you can email me. So I'm easy to find.
Thank you for joining me, Kristina. This has been a great hour with you, and I'm so happy to have you on the show.
Thank you so much for having me. It was wonderful, and I appreciate the thoughtfulness and the inspiration that you're bringing to the space.
So thank you so much. And that is a wrap. Fearless Narratives airs every Monday, Wednesdays, and Friday. Thank you for joining us today. You have been an amazing audience, and we really love your support. So we also would love for you to give us a nice 5-star review. And until next time, stay fearless.